Welcome to the crypt. I really want to start off this video with a disclaimer. This book made me very uncomfortable, especially the ending. It also triggered an emotional response for me. As such, I actually had a very difficult time doing this review. I actually scripted this 2 times to try to strip a lot of the unnecessary emotion out of my video. I'm going to do my best during this review, and again, I'm going to look at my script a lot. I'm going to rely on it very heavily during this video because I really want to stay on topic, but I want you guys to be aware. With that out of the way, let's get into my review of Essence. This once more was from an author I wasn't previously familiar with. So when I did some searches to educate myself about the author after I had read the book, I learned a couple things, mainly that she apparently started writing when she was quite young. I went ahead and read the afterword at the end of the book, and sure enough, she does seem to imply that she was writing it in her teen years, maybe around 16, 17 years old. This part of the video where I go over any possible historical relevance as far as like, did any events or politics at the time affect the writing? It's kind of hard to say because that's a huge range of years to look at, and so I'm not sure how much of it colors the writing. It was released in 2013, and I believe there's been a re-release with a new cover fairly recently, maybe 2019. Like I mentioned before, there is a little bit of political-ish commentary. There's some social and historical commentary. It's oddly placed. It's from the perspective of an injured baby deer. I know that makes no sense. It didn't make any more sense when I read it in the book. I'm kind of lost as to what that was supposed to do, but just to let you guys know, there is a little rant on humanity, I guess, just randomly in the book. The book's timeline is mostly chronological, which I, again, as always, enjoy. I prefer things to not go out of order unless it actually adds to the story to do so. So this one is mostly in order. And the reason I say mostly is there were parts near the last half of the book where there are a bunch of time jumps, and then she seems to backtrack. The timeline gets really hazy at one point of the book, and it seems like she'll go forward like the next 30 years, and then she'll suddenly talk about a family that hasn't aged 30 full years yet. They've only aged maybe 10 years, which means she went forward 30 and backward 20, maybe. It's honestly really hard for me to figure out some of the timelines of the characters. Also, the timeline in general doesn't make sense for all characters concerned. One of the main side characters, Eliza, she goes to school, but she's been dead since like, what, the 50s, 30s, 40s, a long time. And yet she just waltzes into school, takes a seat, and people know her, even though she's dead. So the timeline for Eliza, was very confusing to me because there were times when she would act as if she was more modern and she had died more recently. But then when she actually would show there was a gravestone with dates on it, that made absolutely no sense. There would be records of deaths. Like, maybe she could get away with going to the school and providing fake paperwork, but she'd also have to have fake certifications. That whole element of the story did not track at all. So that structural part, the whole timeline for a lot of the already dead characters does not actually match up. And a lot of the events would do that, where there would be old events, but then when they discuss the events later, they are more recent. The timeline just doesn't seem like it was consistent all the way through. However, the biggest issue I had with the structure of the book was actually the choice of tense. So it is first person present tense. And this made it very difficult for me to connect with the characters, because the whole book reads off as if someone is reading their memory log out loud to you. I get up early, I go downstairs, I get a waffle. There was actually, I'm kind of joking and I'm kind of not, there's an entire paragraph dedicated to her finding an alternative for syrup for her waffles in the morning. By the way, this in no way, shape, or form affects anything else in the story. It's not like she gets, digestion tract problems in school that's really embarrassing because she ate a lot of berries in the morning or anything. This in no way, shape, or form affects anything else in the story. There's not even any other character interactions going on. I think she planned to try to bring it all back by having, she remembered that Grandma used to heat up fruit for her waffles or something, but there's no actual nuance to that memory. It's like, Grandma used to do this. Okay. Do you miss Grandma? The beginning of the book has a little intro of the day she's born, which is very strange, but somewhat interesting, I will admit. Once the story actually begins in chapter 1, we have a little bit of a problem because it's nothing. Nothing happens. We have multiple chapters of her just going through her day and literally listing off every single thing she did in her day. None of these things really tend to affect the other. Also, when there is an event that happens, like something that's coming after her or pulling her to the forest, she does not communicate that to anyone. She does not try to talk to anyone. She doesn't have any communication. She keeps it to herself, but also she continuously keeps doing things that puts herself in danger. And she doesn't seem to have any actual rational thought behind that. But we'll get to that in character. But just to say that the way the structure is written, you start out the story with a really strange intro of the day of her birth, which I could kind of understand as a hook. But then when chapter 1 happens, we just have a bunch of chapters at the beginning of the book where nothing actually happens. It's very disconnected. As I mentioned in the last sector, this book feels disconnected, in part because of the structure and how they've set it up, but also because the main character doesn't seem to have any clear wants or needs, and those, at least if she does, they're not properly expressed in the story. One of the early things that apparently she likes to do is draw. I dismissed this when it first happened because it was only one paragraph, it was very brief, and she doesn't talk about her art or enjoying it or even looking at the world through the eyes of the artist the rest of the book. And it's brought up again after she's died. She asked her mother to have her artwork displayed, and apparently she was a great artist. Okay, but those are the only instances where her art is ever brought to light. Ever. So that's the only thing I could think of that might have been maybe possibly a want, but because it's never deeply discussed, I feel like it was just something to pass time. It feels like something she did to pass time, not something she did because she loved it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but what does she like to do? What does she enjoy doing? Hanging with family? Because it doesn't really show her doing very much of that either. Even when she does eventually go on a camping trip with her family, we don't really, she says, we took hikes, and it's like, okay, can you bring us along with any of that? Can we see any of the interaction between you and your family that you supposedly love so much? What do you want? What does she want as a character? I don't know. I don't know what she wants as a character. And I couldn't figure that out the entire book. And that's a problem, because when she does die, this is going to sound really harsh. Why does she care if she's dead? She doesn't want to be doing anything. I don't think. She doesn't seem to desire anything. Now pulling back to the artwork, if you're an artist and you were dead, but your ghost could interact with physical things in the world, because she does. There's an entire chapter where she does chores with her mother in the house as a ghost. So that, I was like, okay, so the physics of this is she can still interact with the world to an extent. She can't hug people per se, but she can kind of move stuff around. Why isn't she making art then? Because they can move the corpses and stuff too. I can understand having depression and not being able to, but you still think about it. You still have that desire. The desire is still there, but there is no desire. She as a character doesn't have desires. And her needs are unclear. What does she need as a character? I'm not sure. There was no conflict because there was no want and need clearly defined. So she just wanders around aimlessly, like the story itself. The story just wanders. It doesn't get anywhere, and it doesn't really accomplish much of anything. I could understand if you did a story where your character doesn't want anything, but wants to want. I don't know if I explained that well, but that is a possible story you could make, where you have a character who feels disconnected from the world, and the point of the story is to make them connected to the world. I don't know, maybe that's what the author was trying to do in this book, but it doesn't really work, because the character is not just disconnected from the world, they're disconnected from us too, as readers. And she doesn't have a drive to find a drive. Like, she has no drive for literally anything. So I don't get it. And I'm not sure why there is a story for this character, because this character doesn't seem to need a story to be told. There is some introspection that occurs here or there, but it's very, very surface level. Kind of like the whole deer scene, the injured baby deer scene, where she gets inside of its head and it tells her the entire history of humanity and has this whole long spiel about how bad colonization is. But it's very surface level because it doesn't actually affect the character or anything else in the story. They're like, oh yeah, humans kill each other. That's bad. And then the story moves on. I'm like, what was the point of that scene? But that occurs a lot throughout this book. There are these scenes where I feel like they're trying to tell you something, but then they just kind of look at a message of like, yeah, guess humans are kind of terrible to each other sometimes, huh? And then they just keep going and move past it like it never happened at all. So I'm not sure what the point of this is. If it's not going to affect the character, if the character doesn't change, if the character doesn't try to change anything else, if they're just like, huh, that's a thing, and then move on, why was it brought up? There's not a single character within this book that I was able to connect with. Not a single one. I almost started thinking I might be able to connect to the mother figure when she was going through her grief, but she gets to a point where she goes through denial phase, I guess. I'm not entirely sure, but like everything starts shutting down, and the main character pulls away from her, and as a response, so does the audience. And she just shuts down, and she becomes like a dead character. She's like a walking dead character. She doesn't affect anything. She doesn't affect the main lead. The main lead doesn't affect her. They have zero interaction with each other. The main lead, like, visits her sometimes, but it doesn't affect anything. Ironically, she becomes dead to everyone, just as much as the other dead characters are. Okay, this is the point where I'm going to have to bring up the disclaimer in greater detail as we're losing our sunlight. I have religious trauma. I was raised conservative Christian, and I have pulled away from that now. And I'm in therapy. I'm going to be okay. But the very end of this book, after multiple characters die, either from really horrible things, cancer, old age, horrible, very painful slow deaths, and being like cursed to haunt the world for heaven knows how long. After all of that, the end of the book closes with, it was all God's plan. If everything is God's plan, this brings up a lot of questions, like why the lagoon? Why is the lagoon there? Because the lagoon, if people just stumble upon it by accident, just not even intentionally, and they just accidentally touch a rock, boom, soul's out. And then they're cursed to be on this planet and watch everyone they love age and die. Why is that a thing? Bringing up the idea that it's all worth it. Worth it for what exactly? What is it? If you want to say, well, it's for you to learn a lesson. What is the lesson? What is the lesson learned? Because the main character doesn't seem to have learned anything. I think the implication maybe was that I had to die to live. Which, I mean, that's an interesting concept, but she doesn't actually showcase that in her behavior. Even as a Spectre, she could be doing more with her life as a Spectre if she wanted to live life to the fullest. If that was the point, and if she had learned the lesson, she would have been trying harder to live despite being dead. She just wanders around. She doesn't try to interact. She doesn't try to have experiences. She doesn't try to have meaningful relationships. So the message is really muddy here. Overall, I obviously did not have a good time with this one. This book seems to lack drive and a goal. There doesn't seem to be a concise reason for anything that's happening within the book. It just kind of happens, and then sometimes it's explained away in large chunks of info dumping, or it just never is explained at all, and it's just for a reason that remains undisclosed. I would be more okay with that if there was any kind of character growth or something that changed ultimately, but the character ends the book as the exact same character who started the book. There doesn't seem to be any real change or growth of the character, so I'm unsure what the entire book was even for. There are entire chapters I would actually skip, and then just to see if anything would change, nothing would change, and I'd go back in disbelief being like, no, something had to have happened this chapter. Nothing. This book reads more like a concept of a story for me than an actual story. And I don't think it's impossible that you could craft a story out of the general idea, but you would need to, one, flesh out your character with wants and needs. It would be so much more impactful if she was a dedicated artist, and someday she doesn't have to have like a worldwide view of like, I want to be a popular artist. It doesn't have to be something like that. It could be something simple like, someday I want to create a really big mural. That could be her goal. It could be that simple, because that's a goal a child would have. And so I could see that as being good. And when she becomes a ghost, it's really sad to her because she's like, but I can't ever do that. And then she can spend most of the book trying to find a way to create a mural, even though she's a ghost. And that's like her goal, her thing she wants to do, the thing she wants to leave behind in the world. That's actually sounds like a fun story. I would totally read that. Like, that sounds like a good time, because it's heartwarming, it is bittersweet, but it's also like inspiring. Like, that sounds good. So the concept, the bare bones concept, isn't bad. It's just the way it's been executed without any want, without any desire of the characters, means that there's no direction for the story to go in. It just wanders without any point. Let me know in the comments below if you read this, if you liked it. It's totally okay if you have a different perspective than mine. That's totally fine. I'm happy some people seem to like this book. I just struggle in understanding what is enjoyable about it, because I truly couldn't find anything enjoyable about this experience. Thank you so much for watching, and 2 more books to go for my to read. I hope they do good. I really do. I really do.